Chapter 48 of Zhang Henshui's Golden Pink Family. Joking and affectionate laughter live in the villa, and the grand ceremony of success overflows with joy. It turns out that Qingqiu said that since Yanxi hung this thing near the flesh, how could he know about it? It would be a bit embarrassing to ask this question. Yin said softly, "Don't mention it. You think, I know everything about you. So what do you mean by saying it?" Yanxi said, "Your mother won't ask, and it doesn't matter if she does. You should take a look at what this thing is." "How is it?" Qingqiu looked at it carefully, and said with a smile, "This thing is good." Yanxi said, with a smile, "Have you studied this for more than 10 years? "I don't know. What's so good about it? Tell me, what's so good about it?" Qingqiu smiled and said, "I don't understand. I just praised it because it's your magic weapon." They were discussing, and Mrs. Leng was walking in. Qingqiu quickly gave her the piece of jade and said, "Mom, didn't you say you wanted something for him to carry with him?" He took it off right away. Mrs. Leng held it in her hand. After looking at it, he said, "This is indeed a good thing. Take it with you properly." He turned around and asked Yanxi, "Where is this piece of jade? I have never seen it before." Yanxi said, "This has been on my body since I was a child, and I haven't taken it off when I got older. It has always been tied close to the flesh. Where can I see it?" Mrs. Leng smiled and said, "Qingqiu also had a collar, and she always had it. When she was 12 years old, she took it off when people laughed at her." "What are they laughing at?" Qingqiu said, "Why didn't they laugh at that time? Do you think that among many classmates, I am the only one wearing such a collar? Shouldn't I laugh?" Yanxi said, "According to people, men and women carry things on their bodies since they were young, and they can only get rid of them when they get married. I don't know what the reason is." Qingqiu said, "Don't talk nonsense. I have never heard this sentence." Yanxi did not answer, but smiled silently. Mrs. Leng was very happy when she saw that he was an unmarried couple who were about to get married. Their relationship was very romantic. At that time, he handed the jade plaque to Qingqiu and said, "My child, please keep it well. I hope that the two of you can stay together and learn what the new person says. I hope that you can become lifelong companions, seeking happiness for the family." Qingqiu said with a smile, "Mom is more modern now, and she can also say this new style of praise." Yanxi said, "The younger generation is like this, and they can't change it. It's better to make a new move and make the younger generation happy." Mrs. Leng said with a smile, "But when it comes to me, this is what you asked me to do 10 years ago. It can't be done. Now that everyone is like this, why am I so stubborn? Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean that I have any objections to your family and you. I just think your approach is wrong." After hearing what her mother said, Qingqiu frowned and looked at her mother. Mrs. Leng then smiled and said, "These words are all in the past. There is no need to say them. You are also a smart child, and you are still young. With such an uncle, I can finally be regarded as a son-in-law riding a dragon." Yanxi said, with a smile, "I just said that my aunt can say new terms, and now she's talking about illusions." As he said that, he looked at Qingqiu and thought, "We were just talking." Mrs. Leng said, "I'm not saying any illusions. This is a very common saying. In our hometown, if a son-in-law marries a child, there is a couplet like this: fairy fate attracts a phoenix, and a happy son-in-law rides on a dragon. Although you don't, but from my perspective, it's like marrying into a wife, so I accidentally thought of this sentence." Qingqiu said, "It's a very good illusion, and it's quite right. You added this string of words. Note, that's exactly what happened again." Yin turned to Yanxi and said with a smile, "Do you know this code?" Yanxi said, "This is a very common sentence. Why don't I know it?" Qingqiu smiled. Yanxi said, "Do you know? Which book? Can you tell me?" "It's in." Yanxi said, "It's nothing more than a Chinese myth." Qingqiu said, "Of course it's a Chinese myth. You don't need to be particular about it. You can tell it just by looking at the words." "Yes." Yanxi smiled and said, "How about it? Are you going to give me a test today, in front of my aunt? In fact, it is widely spread in my family that you are my Chinese language teacher. I'm willing to be inferior. Why are you testing me?" Qingqiu was joking with him, but he misunderstood and thought he was going to embarrass him in front of his mother. He said again and again, "Come on, you are only allowed to tell jokes to others, and others are not allowed to tell jokes to you." The jade comes to the phoenix, the flute and the history ride the dragon. Such a well-known illusion. Do you really not know it? Yanxi knew clearly that she was covering up for him, so he simply told the source of the illusion. Yin smiled and said, Mr. Leng, you are really good at teaching. If I don't understand something, you just tell me secretly and I will know. Qingqiu looked at him and smiled. Don't say such things in the future. After saying that, you are causing trouble with me. Yanxi said, it doesn't matter. People in the world can't be so equal. Either men are better than women, or women are better than men. Qingqiu curled his lips and said, there is no ambition. People. Mrs. Leng also smiled when she saw it. She always thought in her heart that her family was from a low-class family, and she was afraid that the Jin family would look down upon her. Now, listening to Yanxi's words, she was blindly giving in and treating her daughter as her husband. He must love his wife. At the same time, Qingqiu is very humble and refuses to outdo her husband. This approach is to treat each other with respect, and the future results will not be bad. For half a year, I have been carrying a heavy burden, and today I finally put it down gently. Therefore, I had a great time chatting with Yanxi and asked him to have dinner together. After dinner, Yanxi went to the next room to have a look. It turns out that after Yanxi was ordered by his father to close down the Luo Hutong Poetry Club, he apparently complied with it, but once the house was closed, it would be inconvenient for him to interact with Qingqiu. Therefore, most of the things have not been moved back, and they still have to come every day. And he doesn't shy away from his brothers. They and their friends can come wherever they want. Invisibly, this place has become a club. However, Yanxi made a treaty, only allowed to sing and play small cards, and not bring the opposite sex here to avoid misunderstandings. As you all know, if there is any heterosexual relationship, there will be no gathering here. At this time, Yanxi walked over and heard only the sound of men and women laughing in the small living room. A woman said, after your 7th master gets married, this place will no longer be needed. Why don't you take it over and rent it? It's much more convenient than being at Mr. Liu's house. Heesun smiled and said, just deal with it in a vague way. Don't be too extravagant. The woman said, a loyal person will always be afraid of his wife. Giggled. Then the sound of high-soled shoes hitting the floor was heard, and a commotion broke out. The woman's voice seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember who it was. I walked outside the living room, looked in through the paper window, and realized that there were many people sitting in the room. In addition to Heesun, there were also Liu Baoshan, Zhao Menjiwan, Zhu Yishi, and Miss Wu'er. There was a woman sitting on a sofa with Heesun, her face turned away, so she couldn't see clearly. Expecting that there were no strangers, he yelled at the outer door, you are really unreasonable. You didn't ask whether the owner agreed or not, and just made a fuss in the other person's house out of confusion. As he said this, he walked into the house. Then I felt that I had made a mistake. It turned out that the woman stood up and was still the Miss Zhang Meiyun I met last time. Yanxi then smiled and said, I'm really reckless. I didn't know there was a stranger here. Zhang Meiyun stretched out her hand and shook it with Yanxi. As she shook hands, the scent of powder on her body spread to her body. He also rushed over. He smiled and said, Master Qi, it's been a long time since we last met. Yanxi said, it's been a long time. Why do you have time to come to my place today? Zhang Meiyun said with a smile, I heard that Master Qi's happy event is coming soon, right? Yanxi said, how did Miss Zhang know? The information is very well informed. Zhang Meiyun said with a smile, we have already come to Qi's new wife's house. How can we not know the truth? Yanxi said, it's even more amazing. You understand everything. Miss Wu'er said, don't keep saying nice things. I'm a new guest today, so I should prepare something for you. Yanxi said, Miss Zhang, what do you want to eat? You can ask them to do it. Zhang Meiyun said with a smile, there is no need to prepare for the meal. I plan to invite your new wife to meet her, okay? Yanxi smiled and shook her head. No, she is not popular. Zhang Meiyun said with a smile, it doesn't matter once you meet us. Will you learn to be romantic like us when you meet us? Yanxi said, either words are true. In fact, she has no future. Zhang Meiyun was originally standing there in front of Heesun. Heesun sat down and did not get up. He used 2 fingers to pull the hem of Zhang Meiyun's clothes, and said with a smile, sit down and stand in front of her. Her skirt is blocking her face. Zhang Meiyun said with a smile, He turned around, raised his hand, flexed his 5 fingers and said, I should give you 5 explosive chestnuts right now. His son said, why is this? You are blocking me, and I can't even say anything. A sound? Zhang Meiyun said with a smile. Just tell me not to block it. What do you mean by adding an adjective? She sat down as she spoke. Miss Wu said, second master is an honest man, and now he has learned bad things like this. Zhang Meiyun curled her lips and said, honest man? Don't let the honest man laugh his teeth out after hearing this. His son pulled her. The hand said, Meiyun, what have I done to make you look down on me like this? I am simply not qualified. Meiyun said, anyway, I can't do it in vain. Rumor. Miss Wu was sitting across from Zhang Meiyun and kept giving her dirty looks. She hadn't thought of it for a moment and didn't care. Liu Baoshan smiled at Miss Wu, then turned to Zhang Meiyun and nodded. Zhang Meiyun said, sneaky. What's the matter? Miss Wu said with a smile, you idiot. You never pay attention to what you say, and others will take advantage of you. Zhang Meiyun said, what? This? Before I could say the word matter, an idea came to my mind. Sure enough, there was something missing in my words. His face turned red. He pointed at Miss Wu and said, you are such a good person. How can you make fun of me? Miss Wu said, you really don't know what is good and what is good. I saw that you were deceived by your words, so I gave it to you. A letter. Instead of thanking me for my favor, you actually said that I was making fun of you. Zhang Meiyun originally said it casually to cover up her words, but unexpectedly, she failed to take into account Miss Wu's friendship and asked her to add to it. Not at all unhappy. But immediately Xi Feng couldn't turn around, because he was laughing and kicking his feet on the floor, and he just said, no more, no more. As he spoke, his body kept twisting. In this way, this chapter is over. Miss Wu also excused herself from the conversation and asked Yanxi, really, this place is just like Miss Leng's house. I made an appointment to see her last time we met. I was also absent-minded, so I said at the time, it's quite true. 1 or 2 things disturbed her, and the matter was delayed. Now that I'm here, why don't I go and see her as a favor? Yanxi said with a smile, I'm telling the truth. The bride is the bride, and there are 2 brothers here whom she has never met before. She will be doubly embarrassed when they meet suddenly. Miss Wu said with a smile, you are really considerate of this Miss Leng. You just cover her up everywhere. Heesun also felt that there was something wrong with Qingqiu's arrival, so he said, it's not very convenient after all. Miss Wu's eyes widened slightly, her neck tilted, and she said, second master, you are so stupid. I have to refute your words again. We are both women. Why is it convenient for us to be here, but not for another person? Heesun didn't say anything, but suddenly stood up and spoke to Miss Wu. Calmly. He bowed and said, yes, I made a mistake. I will apologize first, and then give my reasons. Miss Wu turned her body to one side and said with a smile, you are going to die. Do this to me? Well, what's the big gift? Heesun said with a smile, aren't you angry? Let me explain this to you again. Think about it. We are all very close friends. If we are together, there is nothing we can say. I really don't dare to treat someone of the opposite sex. Miss Wu put her feet on the floor and kept saying, okay, don't look down and say it. The more you say it, the more inappropriate you are. Treating people of the same sex? We are women. If we admit that we are women, women are not necessarily inferior to men. Why do we want you not to treat me as a man? Is this an honor? His son was speechless after being refuted by her, and just stood there in a daze. Yanxi said, Miss Wu, I am not going to say anything for the second brother. He is right. When he said he did not treat women of the opposite sex, he did not despise women. He thought they were the same person, so he said that he regarded himself as a woman. It's not bad for women. Otherwise, why doesn't he say that he doesn't dare to treat women as women? It's clear that he doesn't say that women are weaker than men. He might even say that women are stronger than men. Not only do I dare to say this in this room, but even if it is published in the newspaper, no one will say it is wrong. Miss Wu glanced at Yanxi and then at Zhang Meiyun. Zhang Meiyun looked at Yanxi and smiled slightly. Fu nodded again and said, well said, very well said, so righteous that no one can refute you. Second brother, don't give in. Did you mean this when you spoke? His son Budwo said, just smile. Yanxi smiled and said, "Come on, let's stop talking about this article from now on. It's up to me and Brother Urgia to admit his mistake. He made a mistake. Miss Zhang, what do you think of this?" Zhang Meiyun was the first. "The first time I felt that Yanxi was lively and interesting. Today Yanxi talked and forced himself to live from the dead. The more I saw him, the more satisfying he was." Then he looked at Yanxi and smiled. Yanxi didn't know what her intention was. She laughed and smiled in return. Zhang Meiyun rolled her eyes and asked, "Master Qi, I ask you to do something. Can it be done?" Yanxi said, "As long as it can be done, I will obey you." Zhang Meiyun said, "This is a small thing. You must. It can be done. I will come here to visit you tomorrow afternoon and ask you to introduce me to the new lady. There is probably nothing difficult about this matter." Yanxi said, "Why bother? You can meet everyone." Zhang Meiyun said, "When it comes to becoming a bride, she won't talk. It's not easy to talk to her. Now if you meet her, you can talk casually. When it's time to become a bride, I can still be considered an old friend of hers and can take care of her. If you don't agree, you will look down on me and refuse to introduce her. That's not a bad idea." At this point, he spoke very slowly, with a long tail, as if the following sentence was necessary and unspeakable. So he just looked at Zhang Meiyun's face. She chuckled and said, "Don't be petty. I also know that it is very taboo for you to introduce your girlfriend to meet your new wife, but it doesn't matter. I'll come with Miss Wu." Miss Wu said, "Don't make an appointment. I'm afraid I don't have time." Seeing her reply, Zhang Meiyun didn't ask further. Everyone fooled around for a while and then dispersed. On the next morning, Zhang Meiyun went to visit Yanxi alone. Yanxi was not sleeping in Luo Huahutong. When Zhang Meiyun went to visit him, he was sleeping at home and had not gotten up. Zhang Meiyun was of course disappointed. She then took out a piece of paper from her body and wrote on it, "Seventh Master, I came to visit you on time, but you broke your promise again. Your brother Heesun asked me to come to your headquarters tonight. Maybe we can meet in the evening." After leaving the paper, she left. Li Gi took the paper and sent it home. Yanxi had just gotten up, and Li Gi handed him the business card. Yanxi was wiping soap with both hands, and his arms were covered with white bubbles. He was wiping his face in front of the mirror on the washstand. He couldn't use his hands to take the business card. Li Gi pinched a corner with 2 fingers and handed the business card to Yanxi for him to see. After reading it, he shook his head. Li Gi knew it was nothing important, so he threw it on the table. Yanxi naturally didn't pay attention to it. Later, he picked it up with his hand and stuffed it into a small drawer on the desk. Because tomorrow is the day before the wedding, and the day after tomorrow will be the day of the wedding. After the wedding date will be determined. In this way, I have to be busy. After washing my face, I only drank half a bowl of black tea, holding 2 biscuits in my hand, and while eating, I came to Daozi. Daozi was leaning over the table to write a manuscript. When Yanxi came in, she turned the paper over. Yanxi said, "What manuscript can't I see?" Daozi said, "You can see it if you want." Yanxi heard it and reached out to take it. Daozi held his hand again and said, "I haven't told your brother-in-law about this yet. I don't know what he thinks." Yanxi smiled and said, "I understand. They are making a list of gifts for me. 4th sister has helped me a lot in this matter. No other gift can compare to this. What gift is there to give?" Daozi smiled and said, "What you said is reasonable, but time is too tight. I can only buy a few things for you. It's too late for me to do anything else." Yanxi smiled and said, "I came here just for this matter. What day do you think is the most suitable?" Daozi said, "For you, it is naturally the fastest and most suitable day. It is appropriate, but the house needs to be arranged slowly, and it will be late for 2 Sundays." Yanxi smiled and said, "That won't work." Daozi said, "Why not? You have to give a reason." Yanxi smiled and said, "Actually, there is no reason, but I think it's done early, and it can be considered as one thing done." Daozi said, "We don't have anything. It's really a little faster, but it's just a little sloppy. I don't know if the Leng family is willing." Yanxi said, "There is nothing unwilling. I really don't want to. I can solve it with one word." Daozi smiled, supported his head with one hand on the table, and just looked at Yanxi. Yanxi was wearing a suit, with his hands in his pockets, and just walked around the room. Daozi coughed, and he stopped immediately, turned over and opened his mouth to speak. Daozi smiled and said, I didn't talk to you. What do you want to say? Yanxi didn't say anything. His hands were still in his pockets, and he walked around the room again. He was not prepared and bumped into someone, couldn't stand, and leaned back. If it wasn't for the table to support him, he would have almost fallen. Looking up, it was Liu Shuhua who came in. He smiled and said, Look, you came to my room in a hurry. Yanxi smiled and said, This can't be blamed on me alone. You didn't see me. If you saw me, you would have moved away earlier and you wouldn't have bumped into me. Liu Shuhua smiled and said, You are taking the initiative. I didn't say anything to you. But you blame me? What's the matter? Why are you like an ant on a hot stone? Daozi repeated his words about moving up the wedding date. Liu Shuhua said, Let's move it up. At this point, we are happy to do favors when things happen. It doesn't have to be too close, just next Sunday. Lao Qi, what do you think? Yanxi smiled when he heard it. Daozi said, Today is Wednesday. There are only 10 days in total. Can we get everything done? Yanxi said, There is not much left to do. Daozi smiled and said, Anyway, you always agree to do it. Okay, I will do it this way. Let me ask the elders for their opinions first. If they agree, we will do it this way. Yanxi smiled and said, This time, it seems to be a cabinet system, right? Daozi said, In this way, you basically want me to make the decision. Do you know that I have offended people for your affairs? I should also compromise with all parties? Liu Shuhua smiled and said, You have done 8 or 9 out of 10 major affairs of the country. On the day of ascending the throne, you can just do it by yourself and make the decision. Your politeness may not be considered as compromise, right? Daozi puffed out his chest and said, If you want me to do it, I will do it. What's there to be afraid of? Liu Shuhua nodded and clapped his hands a few more times. Daozi put a piece of paper on the table into his pocket and immediately went upstairs. Liu Shuhua came over and held Yanxi's hand, shaking it a few times, looking at Yanxi's face, just grinning. Yanxi also felt that there was something interesting, and just wanted to express his joy in his heart, but he couldn't tell why he was happy. Liu Shuhua looked at his face, that was about to laugh, and said with a smile, At this time, I think nothing can be as happy as you feel in your heart. But you have to remember that you're 4th sister and you have worked hard, so you don't want the matchmaker to be thrown over the wall when the new couple enters the room. Yanxi just laughed when he heard it. After a while, Daozi came out and said that his mother agreed to it, and it would be that day. In this way, Yanxi felt relieved. Since that day, everyone in the Jin residence was busy. All the servants went out to clean the house. The old furnishings in the living rooms were put away and replaced with new ones. Because Yanxi knew that Qingqiu loved quietness, he had already discussed with his mother and set aside 3 rooms in a small courtyard as the new house. Because these 3 houses were a little remote, they were often empty, so they were a little old. Now they were hurriedly decorated. After all, they were a new family, so they were embarrassed to put up wedding couplets and set up wedding tents. But civilized decorations were necessary. Therefore, all the main roads were decorated with colorful silk flowers. At each door, there were colorful frames with fresh flowers and leaves, and countless small electric lights were decorated in the flower frames. Along the corridor, antique glass-covered electric lights were hung, and colorful tassels were hanging under the lights. At night, the lights were turned on, and a red light shone under the green leaves and red flowers. That kind of prosperity was what ordinary people could not dream of. All kinds of beams and pillars under the frames were repainted. In the atmosphere of joy and welcome, even the red lacquered railings had an indescribable joy. Fortunately, the Jin family had storage of various things, so as long as a little decoration was made, everything was ready. On the day of the big gift, Jin Quan and Mrs. Jin prepared a banquet to invite Zhang Henshui and Mrs. Leng to meet their relatives. Mrs. Leng hesitated for a day, thinking that they were a couple, and she was a brother and sister, which was not suitable. So she just said that she could not be separated and there were few people in the family, so she only asked Zhang Henshui to come. Poor Zhang Henshui was always a junior official in a commission position. Now he was competing with a big man like the Prime Minister. He was overjoyed and afraid. When he arrived at the Jin family, he had a meal and sweated a few times. He only said one thing when others asked him, and he had nothing to say when others did not ask. Because of this, Yanxi focused on the extravagance of the man's family in this marriage, and felt that the woman's family was too cold and inappropriate. In secret, she handed Qingqiu a check for 600 yuans, and asked Jingui and Li Delu to help at the Leng residence. She only cared about the extravagance here, and did not go to the Leng family in the past few days. Fortunately, Song Runking was at home and could always take charge of some things, so she felt relieved. In the hustle and bustle, the days of preparing for the wedding suddenly passed. Because the family was so well known, they were reluctant to publicize their children's marriages, and only wrote a few invitations to their close friends. This time, Yanxi's marriage was so urgent that there was no time to inform relatives and friends. However, they did not keep it secret. Among them, people like Liu Baoshan made up something out of nothing and had to find something to do. Now that they had a topic, how could they give up? Therefore, after just a few phone calls, all the friends in the city were aroused. Since the past 5 days, gifts have been sent to the Jin family in an endless stream. Liu Baoshan and others, however, only sent some entertainment things, a play, a group of acrobatics, and half a dozen movies. Liu Baoshan worked hard and became the general supervisor. On the night of the previous day, the doors of the Jin family were opened from the inside to the outside. All the electric lights were turned on at the same time, illuminating the sky and the earth. The servants of the Jin family shuttled back and forth. Yanxi himself was now at a loss and just sat there. But even though I was sitting quietly, I felt that I hadn't done anything, here and there. My mind was busy and my spirit was very tired. I was bored sitting down, so I thought about how to give a speech to the witness and the host. If everyone wanted me to give a speech, how would I respond? It turned out that Jin Quan had invited Zhou Bulian, the president of Northern University, to be the witness for the sake of respectability. He had been the Minister of Education, and Yanxi had studied at the affiliated middle school of that university for 2 semesters, so he could be considered his teacher. Moreover, President Zhou was an old scholar, who could add color to the marriage of Jin and Leng. The 2 matchmakers were originally a ritual in modern marriages. Because the status of the matchmaker was equivalent to the old-fashioned matchmaker, modern marriages basically did not need a matchmaker. As for the literal meaning, most modern couples would not need someone to introduce them. After the engagement was made, the man and woman went to find a matchmaker. Often, the matchmaker A did not know the matchmaker B, or did not know the matchmaker. Instead, the matchmaker had to introduce the matchmaker to the matchmaker. This is very interesting. Because of this, the Jin family simply took care of it and invited 2 matchmakers at the same time. One of the 2 matchmakers was Wu Daoqing, who was once the Secretary General under Jin Quan, and the other was Zhang Henshui, who was once the Deputy Director under Jin Quan. These 2 people in the Jin family were worried about not finding a job, and now Jin Quan personally invited them. Of course, they obeyed. Jin Quan had to attend to some socializing for the sake of his children's marriage. Therefore, he prepared a banquet the night before and invited a witness and 2 matchmakers. It happened that a group of friends from Tianjin took the afternoon train to Beijing and arrived at around 7 o'clock. Jin Quan also welcomed them and temporarily added to tables, in which Mrs. Jin accompanied the female guests from Tianjin. So this night was noisy for most of the night. The next day, Zhang Henshui, the director of the Office of Ceremonial Officials of the Presidential Palace, brought the music band of the palace to be used. The Infantry Command Office also dispatched a company of fully armed infantry assistant MCs. Needless to say, the police department notified the district office the day before and added 4 guards in front of Prime Minister Jin's residence. When the wedding day came, the district sent 12 more policemen and a patrol captain to follow the car to maintain order along the way. In addition, there were people who came to help, all of whom arrived early in the morning. Therefore, before 9 o'clock in the morning, the area of Wui Lane was already full of cars and horses. Some small business owners came to do business with servants and drivers. Fruits, sesame cakes, and even people selling cakes and bean juice set up more than 10 loads in front and behind, making the place even more noisy. This kind of excitement is beyond description. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.